we are live on YouTube. And as I said, tonight we are going to be talking about hydration. We're going to talk a little bit about the basic physiology of blood, as well as lymph and bile. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to hydrate. I know it sounds sort of like, well, you just drink water, but there's other things involved, and tonight we'll talk about those. We'll end tonight's class with that. So as always, let me share my screen, and we will get started. All right, so let me close some of these down, and then I'm going to blow my screen up here. One moment. Okay, so as I said, tonight we're going to be talking about fluids. We'll be talking about blood, bile, lymph, and general principles of hydration. And there'll be some, hopefully, as always, I think this will be our fourth test. So there'll be a test at the very end, very fun, simple test. Still getting good comments on that, so we'll continue adding that. And tonight I'm actually going to add a few interesting sort of stories that are interesting. So first we'll talk about blood, and we'll talk a little bit about what makes up blood, then move on to nutrition and the blood, and just some curiosities that I find very interesting. Let's close this down. So basically, blood is made up of 78% water and 22% solids. A lot of people sort of think that it's like 90-something% water, but it actually isn't. The plasma, however, is 95% water. And so in other words, you take out the solids from blood, you're left with what's called plasma. And in the plasma, that's 95% water and other ingredients like albumin, which is like basically protein, and is a general indicator of protein status in the body when we're checking blood in medicine. Blood sugar, glucose, lipids, fats, vitamins, minerals, waste products like ammonia and urea. We'll talk about those a little bit afterwards. Gases, gases can dissolve in water. They can also be carried as well. And we'll talk about that. Obviously, you know that hemoglobin carries oxygen and brings it back to be released as carbon dioxide. But additionally, you have gases that dissolve into the blood, and those are measured, in fact, when we're checking sort of the acid-base balance of the body. We often get blood gases from the arteries to see what's going on there, and of course hormones as well. So what makes up the 22% that's solid? Well, we know that essentially it's red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Many of you already know that. For some of you, this is basic, but I think it's always good to get a review. Amazingly, there are 270 million hemoglobin proteins per red blood cell. Really incredible. And why are they red? They're red because when iron is bound to oxygen, basically it's red. Of course, that's why when there is no oxygen in the blood, or less oxygen, then it has carbon dioxide, the blood is darker and more on the, technically more on the bluish side when it's getting back to the heart and the carbon dioxide is being released. Red blood cells live only around 4 months. And one of the things that a lot of you know is this test called hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of essentially your blood sugar over the last 3 to 4 months. And the reason is because if sugar is bound, a certain percentage of sugar is bound to the protein in the red blood cells, then this is sort of irreversibly bound. So if we know how much blood sugar is bound to the protein in the red blood cell, then we have a general idea of what your blood sugar was over the last 4 months. So let me just say that again. Essentially, they're taking red blood cells, they're looking, and they're trying to see how much has blood sugar bound to protein. And then because they're only in the bloodstream for 4 months, then you can get a general indicator of what your blood sugar was like over the last 4 months. And they're made in the bone marrow at a very fast rate. I mean, millions of these things probably every hour. White blood cells, of course, we're aware of those. They're part of your immune system. We're not going to go into detail about that. And platelets, which help you clot. And that's certainly important for you to have. So let's talk a little bit about the nutrition and the blood. So now we have a basic understanding, right? We understand that we have got plasma, which is mostly water, and we've got red blood cells, white blood cells, and in the plasma, there's all kinds of things that are dissolved. So those things that we spoke about, there are fats and vitamins and minerals and protein, all these things sort of circulating through the blood. Some being carried, like for example, fats are carried usually on what are called lipoproteins. You probably have heard of that, but basically they're carrier proteins. And some things are dissolved, like gases and water-soluble types of nutrients. We'll talk a little bit about that. Many of you, or not many of you, but some of you have heard about the blood type diet. And the blood type diet basically says that if you have a certain type of blood type, A, B, O, whatever it is, that there's a certain diet. There's really no evidence for this. It is based on this theory of lectins, which is a real thing. There are people who are very sensitive to lectins. And there have been a few, there was one report, I think, that showed something like raw lima beans or something of caused what's called the agglutination of red blood cells, like clumping of red blood cells, and people who had more clumping in people who had a certain blood type. But as we've spoken about lectins many times in past lectures, and while it is true that some people are more sensitive to them than others, it doesn't correlate with your blood type. So I don't have any, if you want to try the blood type diet, I'm certainly not going to tell you not to do it. But in terms of the evidence, there's minimal evidence. Okay, so let's get back to nutrition and the blood. So we have, as we've already spoken, fat-soluble things. So fat-soluble vitamins like A and D and E and K, all of these are fat-soluble, but there are also other fat-soluble nutrients like fats, if you eat olive oil or some, other sorts of fats. And then there are water-soluble things. So water-soluble, we know 95% of the plasma and 78% of the blood in general is water-soluble. So these basically move independently in the blood. It's like, for example, if you were to take anything that's soluble, like vitamin C, and put it in water, it will completely dissolve. But if you take, say, olive oil and you pour it into water, of course, you know that it's not going to dissolve. It's going to float on the top in fat globules. So the question is, how in the world does your blood, which is not basically, the majority water, how is it going to transport fat or fat-soluble types of things? And the answer is that it's packed into these lipoproteins, lipo meaning fat and protein, of course, protein. So these are basically carrier proteins for fat. And that's basically how your system generally works. So we have waste in, waste nutrients in, and then we have waste out. Now, when your body processes fat and protein and carbohydrates, I mean, the main byproducts of the actual liberation of energy is CO2 and water. So CO2, of course, carbon dioxide, is a gas. And as a result of that, it needs to be transported. And we've already talked about how carbon dioxide, how gases can be dissolved into the blood, but they're also carried, as we know, by red blood cells back to the lungs to be released and exhaled. So, 25%, just sort of an interesting factoid, 25% of the carbon dioxide is dissolved in the blood in the form of some kind of, not exactly carbon dioxide, but something like carbonic acid or something of that sort. And then 75% is transported by white blood cells. And then the other is water. Water, of course, is easily carried. Lungs, exhaled out through the lungs. So kidneys, going to get rid of excess water. And the liver, believe it or not, actually produces urea from the digestion of proteins and certain vegetables, which is then carried to the kidneys. And that's why you have urea, urine. The urea that's in urine is basically from the liver to the kidneys and then excreted. Other toxins from the liver actually are dumped into the bile, basically. And we'll talk a little bit about the bile in just a moment. Okay. Wanted to make a little note about anemia. Amazingly, it's much more common than you might think. Here, let's close this down. Believe it or not, 25% of the world population has anemia. Even I did not realize that when I was preparing this talk. I wouldn't have guessed that by any stretch of the imagination. Iron deficiency is most common. Other causes, of course, like infection and malnutrition. Women at most risk always with anemia because of pregnancy, menstruation, of course, is going to affect things as well. Men are at a much reduced risk. So let's talk a little bit about iron deficiency anemia in the United States. 2% of adult men, 9 to 12% of Caucasian women, and 20% of Black and Mexican American women. So that was even higher than I expected. So this is a significant issue. In men, iron is often dangerous, because it can increase your risk for heart disease in men. But in women, iron deficiency is an issue, and a significant issue, as you can see. So let's talk a little bit about nutrition and iron deficiency. Basically, it comes down to three things. It comes down to iron, folate, and vitamin B12. And again, for men, it's not so much important to worry that much about iron. But for women, it is. The most potent sources of iron are going to be these top three: beef or chicken liver, oysters, and mussels. All three have a pretty large quantity of iron. And then not too far behind it are beef and sardines. So you can get a good amount of iron from sardines and beef, but you get more from just having a very small, just an ounce or two of chicken liver or beef liver is going to give you an enormous amount, not an enormous amount, but a good amount of iron. There are plant sources, not as high as you're going to get and not as well absorbed, but beans, including fermented soy products like natto or miso or other sorts of fermented soy products, nuts and seeds, leafy greens, tomato paste, is one only because tomato paste is incredibly concentrated tomatoes. You can get a decent amount of iron. And then hearts of palm, like Miracle Noodle, we have a hearts of palm pasta, also has a decent amount of iron as well. And how do we absorb more? One of the old-fashioned ways of absorbing more is actually to take vitamin C. Vitamin C actually improves the absorption of iron in the intestine. And so you're going to absorb the iron from your sources, either animal or plant, if you take a dose of vitamin C. Of course, I'm in favor of everyone taking vitamin C supplement, almost everyone. There are some people, believe it or not, with something called hemochromatosis, which is too much, this condition where you have too much iron, and can run in families. And for those people, you don't want to give them vitamin C because that's going to increase the amount of iron and they already have too much. But besides that, if you don't have that, then pretty much everyone, I think, should be taking a dose of vitamin C. Coffee and tea can interfere with absorption. So if you're drinking coffee and tea with your food and you have an issue with iron, then you're going to want to avoid coffee and tea and drink it when there's no food in your stomach. Cast iron, you can get a little bit of iron if you're cooking on cast iron. and avoiding phytates. Now, we spoke about this in the past. These are what are called anti-nutrients, and they bind minerals, bind elements and minerals like iron. Seeds, nuts, beans, and grains, all of these which have iron in them. But if they're not soaked and sprouted, then you can get a high enough level of a phytate to be able to, that might inhibit your ability to absorb the iron. So we had a whole lecture on traditional methods of preparing foods, which include, fermenting, sprouting, soaking. And we spoke about those in depth, and those types of foods, seeds, nuts, beans, and grains, should be soaked or sprouted. You can just soak almonds overnight, as an example. Beans, of course, are best to be pressure cooked, but certainly soaked a sufficient amount of time and rinsed is going to be important, and same with grains. Next is folate, which is going to help with hemoglobin, and vitamin B12. Folate, of course, is found in leafy green vegetables. B12 is going to be found pretty much in the same foods as the animal-based sources of iron, actually. I don't know if there's a connection between that or not. There probably is, but I can't quite think of the reason why. But beef and chicken liver is going to be very high in B12. Beef, any animal products are going to have a source of B12. There is a source of plant-based B12. We actually have it on the miraclenoodle.com website. It's called Shugavita. It's a palmyra nectar from the palmyra tree in India, and it has it has one of the very, very few plant-based sources of vitamin B12 because of the region that it's grown in India. It's quite if you haven't tried it, it's an interesting sweetener to use, and it's basically a whole food sweetener. So you're getting minerals, vitamins, etc., in the form of a nectar from the palmyra tree. So it's a pretty cool product. Okay, so we spoke about, now you have a pretty clear, I hope you have a clear understanding of blood. So we've got water, we've got plasma, we've got the white blood cells, red blood cells. We have water soluble, fat soluble. We understand how they're transported in the blood now. We understand how things are coming in, how we're excreting them. And now we have a better understanding of actually how important it is to understand a little bit about iron deficiency anemia and the foods and diet that you really need to pay attention to. So thinking about iron, one of my favorite things is that men who donate blood live longer. And the reason is because there are probably several reasons. One is because it's reducing a little bit the amount of iron that men have in their body. And so in men, generally speaking, reducing the iron load is going to be helpful. And that has been proven over and over again that men who donate blood live longer. And speaking of donating blood and living longer, that really, one of my favorite stories is the story of James Harrison. Now, James Harrison is a guy, I probably isn't alive anymore. I'm not really sure. But I just find this story amazing. So James Harrison was an Australian guy, and at the age of 14, he had major chest surgery, and he lost an enormous amount of blood. And he received an enormous number of blood donations to survive. And he was told, how much blood he got, and it really impressed him so much that he wanted to give back, and he resolved to become a donor. And remarkably, his blood was found to contain what's called an Rh group of antigens. And, many of you probably know about this because if you've ever had children, your obstetrician certainly probably told you, or pediatrician have told you about this sort of Rh group and the fact that this antibody can cause a hemolytic disease where basically the blood vessels essentially basically rupture in the newborn. And amazingly, his blood was found to contain this Rh group of antigens. And because of this one guy, it led to the development of products to prevent this disease. And amazingly, he did 1,000 plasma donations. Now we know what plasma donations are. Plasma, we know what that is now. It's that water part of the blood. And when you become a plasma donor, you have to really sit there because they're actually taking out your plasma. And we know now, of course, that in the plasma, there are, it's different than what you would get if you just basically took regular blood. And my father, by the way, who is on the call and is also a physician, is telling me that he is still alive and he's 86 and he's in Australia. Yeah, thank you, Dad. And amazingly, he did 1,000 plasma donations. He stopped at the age of 81, which I believe is the upper age limit in Australia. But he did one donation every 3 weeks for 57 years. Now, why is it that you could do a plasma donation every 3 weeks? You certainly couldn't do that with red blood cells, with whole blood. And the reason is because you can't take out all those red blood cells. You're not going to produce enough. But plasma basically is, as we spoke about, the water part, which has, all those sort of dissolved things in it. And so he was doing a donation every 3 weeks for 57 years, amazingly. And his donations basically helped save 2.4 million babies, including his own granddaughter. It's just an amazing story. Really just a historical, amazing story. They're hoping at some point to come up with an artificial way of identifying, of creating the products that they were able to produce from his blood. And they call it the Project James in a Jar, but it's still not complete. And they still require people who have this to donate plasma. But it's really, I just think it's just the coolest story and a very touching story. I mean, think about it. If he hadn't had that horrible chest surgery at 14, there wouldn't be a lot of babies that survived with that. Incredible. The other curiosity that I find really interesting is the difference between chlorophyll, which we all know is the green in plants, and hemoglobin. I just find this really fascinating and have since I learned about it. Take a look at this. This is human hemoglobin, and we know that in the center is iron, and the iron binds oxygen. And look at how similar these are. The only difference, I mean, there are a few differences, but the major difference is sort of plant chlorophyll. You can almost think about it as the blood of the plant, and the difference, really main difference, being magnesium. So we know iron is what causes the blood to be red, because iron combined with oxygen is going to make it red. And probably, I don't know the answer, but probably there's something about the magnesium that is probably in some way responsible for making plants green. But isn't that something? How incredibly similar those are. Okay, let's move on to lymph. Or we'll go to bile next. And let me just take a look at time. One moment. Okay. So bile, which is basically released from your gallbladder. We spoke about that a little bit during the gut health lecture, and we did a little anatomy lesson then. But basically, bile is stored in your gallbladder, and it releases, of course, bile into your duodenum. That's sort of first part of your small intestine. And it basically helps digest fats. Now, if you remember from the gut lecture, the patient's report that I showed you actually showed that while she had bile, she didn't have a lot of what are called lipases, which are which can be released from the pancreas, but there's also an issue with digesting fats. And if you lack bile, you can have a whole host of symptoms, including diarrhea, gas, cramps, erratic bowel movements, unexplained weight loss if you lack bile. Now, obviously, people get their gallbladders out, and those people can take bile salts supplements or enzymes to help. And they can live fine, but they do have to be careful with their fats. It helps absorb fat-soluble vitamins. It helps eliminate waste products. Again, mainly because of this sort of fat-soluble capacity, that we talked about how dissolving fat is sort of different than dissolving water-based things. And one thing which is very interesting is that you in order to make hormones, you need fat. And people with gallbladder issues and bile issues can have abnormal hormones, including thyroid issues, can be sometimes traced back to issues with bile production. And in order to eating for healthy production of bile, foods that are bitter, like dandelion and other types of bitter vegetables, are going to be helpful in the production of bile. Avoiding liver toxins sort of makes sense: sugar, alcohol, processed foods. And deep breathing. Why would deep breathing? Because two reasons. One is deep diaphragmatic breathing actually massages, the liver's right under here. And so when you take these big diaphragmatic breaths, you can actually massage the underside here of your liver, which can help with bile. But additionally, deep breathing relaxes you. And we've spoken about how important it is to normalize your circadian rhythms, meaning that you need to have periods of eating and periods where you're not eating. And what happens there is your gallbladder and your liver, and especially your gallbladder, is not going to be in the process of being challenged all the time, which allows your gallbladder to rest and allows the bile to fill up into the gallbladder. So if you're eating 6 times a day, eating right up until you go to sleep, and then you start eating first thing in the morning, and you haven't had, a good amount of time between the last meal and the first meal, then your digestive system is just in complete overdrive and isn't getting the rest and recharge that it needs. As a result of that, the gallbladder is going to be stressed. And you want the gallbladder and the liver, for that matter, and the intestine and everything else to have a period of time when you're not in the active eating state. So there's so many other things that are tied to that, but in this case we're focusing on just the fact that the gallbladder needs time to be able to normalize itself, and therefore it needs to cease being challenged by food all the time. So that's why intermittent fasting can potentially be very helpful for allowing the gallbladder to sort of do its thing. And unfortunately, for people who have really bad gallbladder disease or early disease, unfortunately, sometimes it's almost too far gone that they can get worse. They can get gallbladder symptoms by intermittent fasting, too long of an intermittent fasting, because just the gallbladder is basically in a dysfunctional state. But for normal gallbladders and normal intestines and normal liver processing, you really want to have a good period of time between your last meal and your first meal. It doesn't have to be, like some people are doing, like 20 hours or, look, it'd be nice if you could get 12 hours from your last meal to your first meal. It'd be even better if you could probably do 13 or 14. But look, start where you're at and see what you can do. And, if this is sort of your first time on one of my classes, we've spoken about this at length, but it really is important for you to really think about that and put sort of a balanced approach between eating and not eating. All right, so let's jump into lymph now. Dictionary definition: a colorless fluid containing white blood cells which bathes the tissues and drains through the lymphatic system into the bloodstream. let's take a look at what it sort of looks like. So this is, let's look at the other diagram first. It's actually a little bit better than this one. Let's see where I put that. Or maybe I forgot to put it in. Let's see. Oh, here it is. So for whatever reason, we're not used to seeing the diagram of a lymphatic system. We're used to seeing, arteries and veins and heart, but it's not common for us to actually see the lymphatic system. So I think it's important to get a view of it because it is a well-defined network, and we just really don't think about it. Of course, you're going to understand what it does in just a moment, but this is what it looks like. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this one first is just because it gives us sort of an outline through the body. Now let's take a look at this diagram and why I included this. So generally speaking, what we get here is the heart obviously is, what's confusing about this is you generally would want the arterial system sort of on the right side. That's why it's a little bit confusing, but essentially think of it this way. The heart is pumping out into the arterial system, and you get your red oxygenated blood, and then it gets into the capillaries and into the arterioles, and then the capillaries, and then there's fluid that sort of gets out into the system, and that's lymph, and it gets into these lymph eventually. After it bathes the blood vessels, it then eventually gets collected into the lymph vessels, which then drain like we showed here, but they end up sort of under your clavicle. This is sort of if you could think about your clavicle here, and it gets dumped into the veins and back into the system. But in the system, in this lymphatic system, we have various things. So we know what the lymph is. It's that colorless fluid that we spoke about, but we also have these lymph nodes. And we all sort of know about lymph nodes, lymph nodes under the arms that your doctor checks when you get a physical, and around your neck as well. You have these what are called cervical lymph nodes as well. And you've got a lot of lymph nodes in the groin area. It's another area that the doctor should check. And we should think of lymph nodes as sort of a filter and monitor system. They are basically taking the lymph, which basically, again, was bathing, the fluid that was bathing the body outside, essentially, of the vessels. And it also produces lymphocytes, white blood cells. So if it's filtering and monitoring, it might find something like an infection, or, if you had, an abscess tooth, which is infected, you could get a cervical lymph node because the infection is basically draining to the lymph node, which is filtering it, getting it, keep sort of capturing it, monitoring it, and then producing white blood cells to alert the immune system to say, hey, something's going on over here. So that's what those lymph nodes do. Eventually, the lymph gets into these lymphatic vessels, and they sort of end up ultimately up here and dump back into the venous system, and then get circulated through the body. All right, so to review, basically, we've got our arteries, and then the arteries filter into smaller vessels, and then eventually the fluid gets out into the system and bathes the body, and then they gets up into lymph nodes where it filters and monitors, maybe with the active production of white blood cells. So it's checking things out, gets into lymphatic vessels, and then it gets put into the collecting ducts, and then back into the blood. Okay, so we spoke about there's some other functions. It maintains fluid levels. It helps absorb fats because it's coming from the digestive tract. There's also fluid from there as well. We know it's part of the immune system. And we already know it because, why is it part of the immune system? Because we spoke about how it can produce blood vessels. And it's transporting waste products and abnormal cells. Just like we hear the unfortunate thing that someone, God forbid, has cancer and they find that they're in the lymph node, that it's spread to the lymph node. And so that's how we know that. The most important thing about, just close some of these down. The most important thing, honestly, about lymph, in other words, what can we really do to ensure that we have a healthy lymphatic system? And the question and the answer is very simple. It is to keep it moving. And how do we keep it moving? We keep it moving by us moving. And there's certain movements that are incredibly good to get the lymph moving. And the number one thing, believe it or not, is mini trampolines are incredibly good. They're incredibly good exercise for both balance and for muscle tone. But one of the most amazing things it does is, by bouncing up and down on these mini trampolines, is that it really facilitates the movement of lymph throughout your body. And this is, think about it again. We've spoken about how lymph is bathing the body. And so really you can think about how if you can keep the lymph fluid moving as much as you possibly can on a regular basis, it means you are bathing the cells of the body at a faster rate than you would if you were immobile. So in this case, you're going to want to do gravity types of exercise, and that's going to be very important. So trampoline, of course, dancing is going to be good. Vibration machines are very good for this. Those machines that have the vibration plates, these are very good. If you get on those and do movements, are very good at moving the lymph in your lymphatic system. Any sort of yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong where there are methodical movements, anything that is going to move the fascia. So again, any weight-bearing exercise, of course, walking, swimming, however, certainly is going to move some lymph, but because it's not a gravity, there's not really a gravity force going on, probably not going to be the most important, the greatest thing to move lymph. It's a great exercise, but just like your bones also need this sort of gravity-based movement, then so does lymph. So trampoline is also going to be good for women and men who are concerned about osteoporosis. There's a much increased risk these days of men having osteoporosis. It used to be more of a women's disease, it still is, but there has been a great increase in osteoporosis in men. So men also need to be concerned about continuing to do gravity-based exercises as well. But if you're well enough to do mini trampolines, you have adequate balance and such, it can be incredibly great, or a vibration machine as well. Okay, so we have done so far, well, basically, we now understand the blood and how it's broken up and how fluid and various things are transported through the blood. We understand the function of bile and how important it is for fats, as well as hormones, and how important it is for you to give your digestive system a rest. And now we have a better understanding of how this lymphatic system works and how it has lymph nodes that are filtering, how it's bathing the system. And ultimately, what we want to remember is if it's bathing all the cells in our body, we want to make sure those are moving around as much as possible. Now, bile doesn't require that much issue with water, with hydration, but certainly lymph and blood are going to be very important. So next, we're going to end tonight's talk. Wow, with, I didn't realize the time. We got to really get moving here. So let's go through basic principles of hydration. So I can sum this up very, very quickly. Obviously, you need to drink water. drink when you're thirsty, but when you're over 65, you do have to be a little bit more cautious. Your thirst mechanism is very good. Obviously, you want to make sure your urine is not too dark as another indicator. But if you are over 65, it definitely is something you should watch your urine color and just be cautious, because the thermostat, we all have a thermostat where, oh, we become thirsty. That's a little bit off when you're over the age of 65. There are different types of water. Mineral water, spring water, sparkling water from natural source, all have minerals. That's going to be good. Distilled water, reverse osmosis water, no minerals. Therefore, you're going to want to add something to that. If you're drinking distilled or reverse osmosis, I use a product called concentrates, just from like a distillation of, not distillation, like a concentration of Salt Lake, and you get all the minerals, and it's free of toxins and such. Alkaline water, very little proof that this does anything. I tend to think it doesn't even make a whole lot of sense to me. Yes, we want our bodies alkaline, generally speaking, and we get that from eating lots of leafy greens and plants, generally. But drinking alkaline water, to me, it doesn't make sense, because you're then going to neutralize some of the acid in the stomach. Anyway, there's very little proof that alkaline water does anything for you. Okay, the next thing is that we want to get water from your food. Now, I know that sounds weird, but the truth is that there is a doctor by the name of, blanking on his name, but he discovered something called the fourth phase of water, which is like water that is almost like a gel, and they say it's H3O2. It's more dense than water, and it often lines the blood vessels in, it's like next to the cell membranes in the body, and is also found naturally in water that is just like immediately captured from the spring, that's been sort of vortexed, and it's a very interesting system. And essentially, the theory is that this gel water is more hydrating than regular water. And there's some controversy on this. If you go to like Wikipedia, they say it's totally bogus, but actually there have been enough studies where I think it's been clearly shown that there is what's called it's called the easy zone. It's like this, I think he called it exclusionary zone, where the of water next to cell membranes. And again, you can get this from vegetables. So the theory goes that if you're getting your water from water that's been organized by cell membranes or by nature, that there is a natural hydrating effect. So that's basically the theory. The doctor's name is Dr. Gerald Pollack. I think he's in Washington State. So what are the vegetables that have the most water? Cucumbers, romaine lettuce, celery, radishes, zucchini. All these are 90% plus. Even broccoli is 90% water. So cucumber juice, lettuce, making a juice of cucumbers, celery, zucchini. I'm drinking a juice tonight that's cucumber, spinach, kale, celery, lemon, and cilantro. It's very good. And I think some of the reason that you feel so good when you drink vegetable juice is probably because you're getting this fourth phase of water, this what they call structured water, in the vegetable juice. Not necessarily, believe it or not, I think obviously you're getting a lot of phytonutrients, all those things that are in the green and the chlorophyll and all that sort of stuff. But I think some of the reason is, and some people feel that because it's immediately juiced and then you drink it, that it's remaining in this structured form, and that can be more hydrating. So you want to concentrate obviously on drinking water, but also getting a lot of water, as much water as you can from vegetables and from fruits, of course. These are some very high water content: starfruit, watermelon, strawberries, grapefruit, cantaloupe, pineapple, all near 90% water. And then you can structure your own water. Obviously, of course, soaked chia seeds, even miracle noodle is 97% water. And when you are able to, in a stable gel, like chia seeds, chia seeds soak up the water and they form the gel around the seed. Well, basically, that is structured. That's the gel water. Well, miracle noodle also contains gel water. So believe it or not, I was talking to, before I even knew about this, many years ago, I was talking to this person, this doctor who has been a real inspiration to me. And she pointed out, she said, one of the reasons I love your product so much is that you're getting all this water from this gel that the noodles are made from. And of course, vegetable juices. Okay, so should you add something to your water? We spoke about that. Yes, probably minerals. You can add a pinch of, if you're doing distilled water or reverse osmosis water, you're going to want to basically add, you could, as I said, a pinch of Himalayan salt or Celtic sea salt. There's also something called Quinton, after this guy, Rene Quinton. He was a French scientist who came up with sort of a way of taking the minerals from seawater and making a fluid replacement that apparently saved many lives over 100 years ago, I think. And you can buy it today, where they basically take a certain part of a deep ocean, clean ocean water, and they take it out and they can make it in a form that you can add it to your water, and you get sort of this perfect balance of minerals. It's very, very similar to plasma, believe it or not. But I use Concentrace, that company, and pumping your fluid movement. Apparently when you are really doing a lot of movement, you are with your fascia, the things that surround the muscles, they pump a lot of fluid. Of course, we know now about lymphatic movement as well. That's going to be incredibly important. And it's really important for your overall hydration, to make sure that you're flushing the system. Remember, we think about fluid as the fluid that's bathing all the blood, all the cells in the body. So you really want that moving as much as possible. Sharon's asking, is there a relationship between the lymph system and the meridians in Chinese medicine? I don't think so. I think they match the blood vessels probably more than the lymphatic system, but it definitely makes you think if you've seen those meridian charts, it kind of looks like, I don't blame you for wondering about that, because it sort of looks like that. But I think that it doesn't, of course, match. There's really no like anatomical direct correlation between the meridians, but I think they match the blood vessels a little bit closer than the lymph system. But that's a very good question. Okay, so we've covered blood, we've covered lymph, bile, and the key principle of hydration is to drink when you're thirsty and add some water from foods. So let's now do our test, and we will call it a night. One moment. Let me share my screen here, and we'll do the test. 1 second. Okay, let's see, share screen. And okay, so you should see my screen, and we're going to, let's see, preview test. Yep, logged me out. Okay, let's see here, tests and fluids and edit test and preview test. Okay. All right, and let me blow up my screen. Okay. And sorry, just taking a little time here. Okay. So what percent of plasma is water? 95%, 99%, or 78%? Hopefully you can see my screen. If you can't, let me know. Okay, very good. A, that is correct. Next question. How much evidence is there for the blood type diet? Minimal or extensive? correct, minimal. And that doesn't mean there's not something related to lectins, which I've spoken about before, but not related to your blood type. What makes up the majority of the blood? White blood cells, red blood cells, or platelets? Right, very good. Okay, next, so red blood cells. How long does a red blood cell live? 30 days, 90 days, or 120 days? Yeah, that's correct. 120 days. Helen, you're always the first one to answer. You're very quick. What is the main difference between hemoglobin and chlorophyll? Calcium and magnesium, magnesium and copper, iron and copper, iron and magnesium. Yep, D, iron and magnesium. Very, very close, except for that, just that. Men should donate blood, true or false? True, that is right. They live longer when they donate blood. It's been repeated in many, many studies to show that men who regularly donate blood live longer. And in fact, oddly enough, there are men I know, anti-aging experts, and even if they, for whatever reason, are unable, whether they're on a medication or something that prevents them from donating blood, there are certain anti-aging docs who have services that come that will take their blood and just sort of dispose of it because the data is so strong on lengthening life of men who donate blood. Bile is helpful for which of the following? Helps digest fats, helps absorb fat-soluble vitamins, helps ensure proper hormone production, all of the above, or both A and B. Yep, that's right. It's D. Most people don't realize, but that C, ensuring proper hormone production, is one of those things that, again, you need proper fat digestion in order to ensure proper hormone production. And some people who have issues with bile and gallbladder can have various hormone issues, including thyroid. Okay, very good. Question 8. Which of the following is least effective at moving lymph? Trampoline, swimming, dancing, or vibration machines? That's right, swimming. So it doesn't mean it doesn't move lymph. Obviously, if that's the only exercise you can do, then you do it. But you really want to get the jumping and moving around in gravity to really get the lymph moving. And again, whenever you hear the lymph, I want you to just think the fluid that bathes all the cells in the body. And then I want you to think about how you really need to get that thing moving, as well as making sure you have enough water to hydrate. How many liters of lymph do you have in your, I don't think I actually went over this, but you have around 3 liters of lymph running around in your body. You have, I think it's like 30 liters of fluid or something in your body, like 27 liters sort of that's in the, in the vasculature, and 3 liters that are sort of bathing the cells in the body. So I don't think I actually went over that, but that's the answer. And what should be added to distilled or reverse osmosis water? That's sort of a free question. You have no choices. What would you say? Yep, minerals. And you have your choice. Some people do a pinch of Celtic salt, or they do a pinch of Himalayan salt, or a pinch of real salt from the mines in Salt Lake, or they buy minerals that they can add, like concentrates. I have another one that I don't use much. I think I have it right here, called fulvic acid. This right here. Not sure why I haven't been using it, but you can also add this. It's basically minerals that come from, I think it's like plants that basically plants. It has a bunch, I'm not really sure. It has a bunch of minerals in it, but I'm pretty sure it's from plants. Anyway, there are various mineral sources that you can add, and but it's good if you're drinking a lot of distilled or reverse osmosis. You could not. It's possible that you're not getting enough minerals, so you're going to want to add something to it. So, okay, and that's really it. Let me see if there are any questions. There is. Does drinking large amounts of water just before or during eating impact digestion and absorption of nutrients? So that's a good question. And there's actually a fair amount of debate on that. And there is no question that it does make sense that if you drink too much water while you are eating, that it could impact the absorption of nutrients. That being the case, because you could be diluting various enzymes and or acid in the stomach. So there are some people who suggest that you don't drink huge amounts of water while you are eating. I don't think there are any studies at all to prove that at all. So I don't think there's like a definitive answer. I think that if you feel like you need to drink a little bit of water, obviously we need to drink a little water to help get food down as we're eating. But I think it does make sense that if you're drinking huge amounts of water immediately before eating or during eating, that it could have some sort of impact. So that's not a definitive answer, but it's definitely something that people have discussed. I just don't think there have been any answers to that. So thank you for that question. And I think that's it. So next week, we're up to an hour here. And next week, we're actually going to be talking about exercise beyond cardio and weights. A lot of us most of people are sort of stuck thinking when you think exercise, you think cardio and weights. And there's so much more to fitness and to fitness that's associated with longevity and health than just cardio and weights. And we're going to talk about all kinds of new techniques of exercise and different machines that are new, that are really fascinating, that can sort of hack your body's fitness. And I think you're all going to find it a very interesting lecture. And I look forward to seeing you on episode 53 next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Thank you so much for your attention. And I wish everyone well and to stay healthy.